All right, let's jump right into this explainer. I want you to picture yourself in the freezing, brutal reality of the 12th century Mongolian steppe. Imagine a world where a young outcast named Temujin, the guy we're all eventually going to know as Genghis Khan, learns his very first harsh lesson in power. Survival is the only currency that cannot be borrowed. That was the foundational ethos of a kid who figured out really early on that loyalty out on the steppe, it was nothing more than a cold transaction. You know, you didn't survive by relying on the kindness of others. You survived because you forged something completely unbreakable.
And so, that brings us to the core focus of today's explainer, the precision machine. We're going to completely shatter this historical myth of the chaotic, barbarian horde, because for centuries, popular history has painted the Mongol expansion as just this unthinking wave of destruction. But when we actually dig into the historical data, a totally different picture emerges. Genghis Khan didn't lead a disorganized mob. Not even close. He engineered a highly disciplined, hyper-lethal military system. So we're going to break down exactly how he built this precision machine, layer by layer, starting from absolute zero. Level 1, the orphan. Because to really understand the machine, we have to start at the brutal, traumatic baseline of his youth. This absolutely wasn't an overnight success story. I mean, it was built on decades of sheer trauma. Temujin's life started with a dark omen, a blood clot the size of a knucklebone clenched right in his tiny fist. By age 9, his father was fatally poisoned by a rival clan with bitter almonds, and his family was instantly abandoned. Fast forward to 15, and he's being hunted, captured, and enslaved by a rival clan, literally forced to wear a heavy wooden cage around his neck. Then, at 32, a sworn brother, a guy he'd shared campfires and blood with for over 10 years, betrays him in this devastating 3-day battle. It took decades of surviving these backstabs to learn one crucial lesson. Human sentiment is incredibly fragile, and strict law is the literal only thing you can trust. It took him until age 44 to finally be named Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. Level 2, the alliance. The real turning point hits at age 20, in a moment that honestly would have broken a lesser man. When his young wife gets abducted in a night raid, Temujin doesn't beg. He doesn't submit. Instead, he forges an alliance with his father's old allies to just rain total, absolute destruction on the enemy camp. He realizes that, united, they are an unstoppable force. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive contrast between Genghis Khan and other legendary historical figures. Take Julius Caesar, for example. Caesar built his early power in Rome by borrowing catastrophic amounts of money from wealthy guys like Crassus. He basically built his empire on the back of fragile Roman Senate politics and a massive debt engine. Genghis Khan? He forged his power purely on shared survival and merit. He didn't have piles of gold to borrow. He only had the harsh, transactional loyalty born from surviving the frozen steppe. The foundation wasn't money. It was raw competence and absolute loyalty. Level 3, the Great Law. At age 44, right before his newly unified army marches, he goes and engineers a completely new society. I mean, think about it. On a steppe where the only previous rule of law was pretty much whoever hits hardest wins, Genghis Khan steps up and establishes a rigid, written code of laws. And these aren't just, polite suggestions. They are the literal engineering steps of a precision instrument designed to be the most lethal machine ever assembled. First, he slaps down a strict decimal military structure, making command totally seamless. Second, he builds a mounted courier network that was faster than any communication system on Earth at the time. Third, and this is a real game changer, he mandates promotion by pure merit, never by bloodline. And fourth, he enforces complete religious tolerance in conquered lands just to cut off internal rebellion before it starts. This is the blueprint of a perfectly calibrated machine. Now let's contrast this with another absolute giant of history. Alexander the Great. Alexander relied super heavily on his own physical presence, right? Always charging ahead of his men, completely driven by intense, volatile emotions. He famously murdered one of his closest generals and friends with a spear during a drunken rage, and then practically starved himself in grief. Genghis Khan, though, he completely removed ego from the equation. Generals who failed because of treachery were executed without a second thought, but generals who failed just through sheer bad luck, they were retrained and put right back into the field. His generals executed his vision independently, within a cold, unemotional, and unbreakable system. And this engineered system was so effective that traditional defenses meant absolutely nothing. When Genghis Khan faced the Jin dynasty in northern China, they were hiding behind hundreds of thousands of soldiers and the longest wall ever constructed. We're talking 1,000 years of accumulated stone and static strategy. So, what does the Mongol machine do? They just sweep right around the edges. They use blistering speed to bypass the defenses and gold to bribe the garrisons from the inside. The wall falls without them ever even having to destroy it, making centuries of defense completely irrelevant. Level 4, the Reckoning. At age 55, a fatal miscalculation by a neighboring empire sets the whole machine into motion.
Get this, 450 merchants massacred. So 3 ambassadors are sent to demand justice. 1 is murdered, and 2 are sent back with shaved beards, which was the ultimate unspeakable insult. The leader of the massive Khwarezmian Empire had completely humiliated the Mongol diplomats. A normal ruler flies into a fiery rage, right? But Genghis Khan? He walks alone up a hill, kneels in the dirt, and remains in total absolute silence for 3 full days. He is mathematically calculating the total eradication of a 400-year-old empire. The scale of what comes next is just unmatched. Compare this to Saladin. When Saladin, the great Kurdish sultan, captured Jerusalem, he famously negotiated peace. He allowed the Christians to pay ransom, his own brother bought their freedom, and the city didn't burn out of a deep sense of piety and mercy. Genghis Khan's machine was the exact opposite. Because the Khwarezmian Empire broke the sacred law of diplomatic immunity, the Mongol machine was unleashed with one goal: to leave absolutely nothing behind.
Level 5, the Flood. Enter the apocalyptic logistics. What followed wasn't your standard military campaign. It was a flood of terrifying synchronization. Genghis Khan unleashed 4 distinct armies, moving in 4 different directions, perfectly simultaneously. They swept across the map with a level of precision that was completely alien to medieval warfare. There was literally no escape, which builds to the horrifying reality of what a Mongol victory actually meant. They didn't just defeat cities that resisted, they completely erased them from existence. Mongol engineers would literally divert entire rivers to wash away a city's stone foundations. They made sure the city could never, ever be rebuilt. Libraries burned, centuries of complex irrigation systems collapsed in a matter of days, and entire populations were scattered into the desert. The final result of this ruthless efficiency is staggering. Genghis Khan conquered a full 20%, a fifth, of the Earth's total landmass. From the Pacific coast all the way to the edge of Europe, from Siberia down to the gates of India. One law, one name, ruling over the largest contiguous land empire in human history. This is exactly what happens when you build an unbreakable system, rather than just relying on one person's raw talent. It's a pretty sobering lesson for anyone trying to build a lasting organization today, honestly. True scale requires airtight engineering, not just charisma. Level 6, the open sky. Finally, at 65 years old, the only thing on Earth that could stop the universal ruler arrived. A sudden fall from a horse while out hunting brought on a nasty fever that even his hardened survivor's body just couldn't outlast. But actually, this is where we see his ultimate triumph. When Alexander the Great died, his generals instantly cut his empire into pieces. When King Baldwin IV, the leper king of Jerusalem, died, his fragile, willpower-dependent kingdom fell to Saladin within a couple of years. But Genghis Khan? His power base was never his personal charisma. It was that cold, engineered system of laws and logistics. It was so remarkably well built that the Mongol Empire actually continued to rapidly expand long after he was buried in an unmarked, hidden grave. So, it leaves us with this chilling final thought. What is the true measure of a conqueror? Is it the massive territory they managed to claim while their heart is still beating? Or is it the unbreakable, self-sustaining machine they leave behind when they're gone? It completely redefines how we view the legacy of the orphan who became the universal ruler. Thanks for learning with me in this explainer today, and I really hope this completely changed how you view this incredible piece of history.